Faith Church, hope you're well today. Probably the most famous parable that Jesus ever gave to us is the parable of the prodigal son. At least that's what we've titled it. That's not the title Jesus gave it, but it's a story. Most of you know it. It's in Luke 15. Remember the context. Jesus has been having dinner with some people, some questionable company, prostitutes, tax collectors, folks like that, the kind of people that weren't accepted at all in the religious circles of Jesus' day. And some of the church folks, not really church folks, but the Jewish leaders of his day come to him and they're upset. One of the reasons Jesus was ultimately crucified because people called him a friend of sinners, ironically, which he was. And so he tells these three parables. One's about a lost sheep, another about a lost coin, and then about a lost son. And you probably know the story, I'm sure you do. The younger son goes off and offends his father deeply, but then repents and comes back home and is received with open arms and incredible grace by this father figure who represents God. And the story is really not about the younger son, and it's a huge mistake sometimes when preachers or other people only tell that part of the story, because it's like telling a joke and leaving out the punchline. The punchline is really the older brother who has been faithful to his father this whole time, doing everything the father asks, working hard for the father, staying home, and he hears the news and he's furious. And the parable ends without much resolution at all. And the father inviting the son to come and share in the celebration, and the father won't. The older brother won't do it. It ends with him angry, pouting, furious, really, outside the party. It was interesting for me. I've mentioned this to many of you before, that a lot of scholars think that it was the story of Jonah that Jesus had in mind when he tells the parable of the prodigal son. And the more I think about it, the more I think they're right. That the first two chapters of Jonah are Jonah, the younger son, tries to go to the far country, disobeys his father in heaven, and then ends up coming back home and is shown grace by God. And the last two chapters are kind of Jonah, the older brother, who is furious because God shows grace to people he doesn't think that deserve grace. Both stories end with an individual, Jonah in one case, the older brother in the other case, angry, pouting outside, no resolution. American novelist Flannery O'Connor, I've not really read her material, but this quote makes me want to. In one of her novels, she has this line, one of the characters says, "The way to avoid Jesus was to avoid sin." Think about that for a second. I think she's right. Some people try to avoid Jesus by avoiding sin. In other words, if I can keep the law, if I can be a good enough person in my life, do all the right things, then I really don't need Jesus as Savior. I don't need to turn and ask for help from somebody, because I'm pretty much accomplished in my own. And some might argue I would argue that that's the place of Jonah. That's the place of the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son. And both stories, Jonah in particular, because that's where we are this summer, pushes us to ask ourselves, to what extent is that true of me? To what extent am I the person who tries to avoid Jesus? By that I mean, and Flannery O'Connor means, avoid really needing to surrender to Jesus, because on my own I've established myself. I don't need Jesus to justify my life, because I've justified my life myself for whatever reason. It's one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves. It's a question that the Christian gospel pushes us to answer. So I would, in preparation for Sunday, I would encourage you to maybe again read through the story of Jonah, but read through the prodigal son with Jonah in mind. So it's in Luke 15, and I'm going to unpack a lot more of this on Sunday. There's really good news at the end of it, particularly the way the father responds to people like Jonah, people like the older brother and the prodigal son, and frankly, people like us. So looking forward to that. I feel like God's given me some really important things to share with you. By the way, hope you are reading along with us through Isaiah. Isaiah is not the easiest book in the Bible to read, but it's really worth it. It's rich. It's important. I will link in the email that goes out Friday here a link to a video that kind of gives an overview of Isaiah that you might want to watch, and it would help you as you read through. So anyway, looking forward to worshiping with you, hopefully in person. If you're in town and healthy, that you come and be with us in person. Wherever you are today, as always, I pray you would know the love of God as your Father. You know the grace of Christ and the fellowship, the community, the presence of the Spirit with you. Peace.